she told me that her best friend was the mother of an English guy had been kidnapped by the Khmer Rouge, I think, off a train and murdered. Sean Flynn's mother spent a lot of money searching for him because, you know, she'd lost her husband, Errol Flynn, and Sean Flynn was her only son.
How you doing, everybody? Pete here from Thairish Times. What's the story? Hope you're doing well out there. So today's video, right, we got a legend. I really like this guy that's coming on the channel now. His name is Karl. He has a channel called Karl's Thailand. He's been coming to Thailand since 1987, the year I was born. Just gave my age away there. But yeah, so he's been coming to Thailand since 1987. He speaks Thai really, really well. And he does loads of epic stuff, climbs mountains, goes kayaking, and all this sort of really adventurous stuff. But he's also spent time in Cambodia. His first trip to Cambodia was in 1996. You know, at the time, 1996, at the time he was there, the Khmer Rouge were still active as a guerrilla group in kind of remote parts of Cambodia as well. Like Karl's got real extensive knowledge on, you know, Cambodia, and we can't really interview and talk about and have Cambodia as a subject without really talking about the Khmer Rouge, the background to that, the killing fields, the genocide. And Karl is really knowledgeable about all of that as well. So he's going to talk about that in this video. And then he's going to talk about something I found really interesting. There's a famous disappearance of Sean Flynn, an American photojournalist in Cambodia at the time. It's a really interesting story. There's footage of it as well, literally minutes before he disappeared. And it's not all kind of like mystery and darkness in this video as well. We've got a hilarious story about how Karl was pursued by a woman in a bar in Phnom Penh. I say pursued / harassed. It's absolutely hilarious story. And then Karl is going to talk about how he tracked down a Thai ranger in Khao Yai National Park in Thailand. The Thai ranger had survived a 20-minute maul by a tiger. And you can see in the video that he shows his arm, the scars on his arm after, you know, fighting with a tiger for 20 minutes. So that's today's video, folks. Hope you enjoy. I'm going to leave a link for Karl's channel down below in the description as well. And leave me a comment if you liked the video. If you didn't like the video, leave me a comment. Suggestions on future content as well, what you'd like to see on Thairish Times, put that down in the comment section. Anyone you'd like to see me interview, put it down there. And if you have a story as well, get me on thairishtimes@gmail.com. Cheers. Or Instagram as well. Get me on Instagram. All right, well, Karl, let's get straight into it, right? So thanks for coming on again. Every time you come on, you always give excellent stories. So I know this one is going to be really good as well. I watched a couple of your recent videos about Cambodia. Yeah. And I thought we'd cover that today. So your first time in Cambodia was in 1996. Can you tell us about that?
Sure. Yeah. It was back in 1996. And I think Cambodia first opened up, you know, not long before, maybe like 93, 94, something like that. So it was quite an adventurous place to go to. And I had a good friend of mine called Bill, and he was sort of one of the few friends I've ever had who's like more adventurous than I was. And I guess like together we could be quite a dangerous combination. The only redeeming feature was that Bill didn't drink, so that kind of like that limited the amount of trouble we could get ourselves into. But yeah, I remember Bill just said to me, "Look, Karl, let's go over to Cambodia. You know, it's just opened up and it could be interesting." So we did that. Yeah, we flew out there in October.
And at the time, wasn't Pol Pot was still active? The Khmer Rouge were still kind of active at the time, were they?
That's right, Pete. You know, not too many people are aware of that fact these days. You know, like the Khmer Rouge, the actual government, was booted out of Cambodia in 1979, but they still existed as a guerrilla group until I think just after Pol Pot died. I think maybe that was the end of 97. So they were still a guerrilla group and they were still in charge of different bits of the country. And in those days, up in Siem Reap, you know, Angkor, the ruins at Angkor, some of the outermost ruins of the Angkor complex were still under the control of the Khmer Rouge, you know, and some of the roads at night were still under their control. And they would still, from time to time, kidnap and even murder Westerners. And I can remember that just after my first visit to Cambodia in 1996, I was a cabbie, I was a cab driver. And I just remember one day I picked up a lady from Terminal 4 at Heathrow. And I was telling her about, oh, yeah, I've just been to Cambodia and what an adventure it was. And she told me that her best friend was the mother of an English guy who'd, I think it was just like the year before, had been kidnapped by the Khmer Rouge, I think, off a train and murdered. So, I mean, you can imagine how I felt. You know, obviously, that just sort of like ended the conversation pretty quickly. But yeah, you know, it was like it could be a dangerous place back then. You know, Phnom Penh was relatively safe, well, from the Khmer Rouge anyway. But as soon as you got up country anywhere, yeah, it could be a bit dodgy.
What was Phnom Penh like in the 90s? Because I mean, the development is there's a lot of development going on. So I'd imagine back in the 90s, it was a totally different looking city.
Oh, it was, you know, yeah, it was all that old French style architecture. Like the roads, generally speaking, were in very poor condition. You know, most of the main roads going down towards Riverside 130, 136, 154, 172, and that, they were kind of like dirt tracks, you know, and they were just like almost, you know, potholed dirt mud roads. Also, it was a very dark city, you know, like most of the roads weren't lit at night. You know, some of the main boulevards were, but you know, most of the roads, it was, yeah, very quiet. Also, you know, it was a city very much in transition. You know, they were kind of just, there was starting to be foreign investment was starting to go in there, but it was kind of still very backwards, you know. Uh, it could still, you know, well, like one of the biggest threats to tourists back then were the local police. You know, it wasn't unknown for the police to kind of stick you up. You know, like I'd heard of people, you know, like who there used to be a bar called Martinis. You know, that was out in the backside of nowhere, and the warning was, you know, like if you got on a motorcycle coming there, you might be stuck up by the police, you know, at machine gun point, and just sort of basically, you know,
Shaking down for
extracted
some cash.
some cash. And I do remember on that first trip, myself and Bill got a motorcycle, and we were going down one of the main boulevards, and the police did pull us over. And I remember the police saying, "You, no motorbike, no motorbike." And me and Bill was saying, well, what about him? What about him? What about her? You know, because everybody was on motorcycles. He goes, no motorbike. He goes, $5, $5. And we said, no, what about? And we were arguing. In the end, the guy just said, look, he goes, I poor traffic policeman in Cambodia. He said, I want to buy some beer. Please give me $2. And we just laughed, you know. We just sort of like, we gave him a couple of dollars because of like the honest way he was being corrupt, you know. It was more of an adventure, definitely. You know, it was much more an adventure. It was much more kind of like, as everybody says, like kind of Wild West.
Yeah.
I've never subscribed to that. Everybody says, oh, you know, Phnom Penh's like Bangkok was 20 years ago or Thailand was 20 years ago. You know, like I never subscribed to that. You know, I always saw the places as two different entities, you know? I mean, sure, there's similarities, you know, they're both Buddhist countries and that, but I always felt that they had a different vibe and the people were different.
How are the people different, Karl? I often wondered that because you see a lot of Cambodian people in Thailand. I just wondered, like, how are they different?
I think uh, the Khmers are just a lot more kind of placid and perhaps modest. You know, I think that the Thais are more colourful and more lively, but they can also sometimes be a bit arrogant, you know. Whereas I just find, the Khmer is just a bit more kind of quiet and humble, you know.
Maybe it's because of the development. Maybe if we went back to Thailand 50 years ago, might be similar. I don't know. I don't
Oh,
know.
I'm sure. Yeah, you know, that was one thing I do remember thinking on my first few trips to Cambodia was there was, you know, the Khmer Rouge had wiped out a whole generation of educated people, and we're only talking about 17 years after it all ended. And, you know, there was a big gap left in their society. You know, foreign investment was only just starting to go in. So, you know, like, yeah, you know, the gap was obvious, and it probably is something to do with it. You know, a lot of their kind of recent history had been wiped out.
Let's talk about that for a second, Karl, because I'm not too familiar with what happened in Cambodia. Like I know about the Khmer Rouge, and I know that educated people were murdered. There was a genocide, like a genocide
Sure.
happened. Can you just give us like the kind of the background of it? Like what happened?
Well, yeah, it was, you know, it was a communist group called Khmer Rouge, and they'd been fighting a battle since, I don't, you know, probably like the very late 60s, early 70s. And they'd been sort of taking over bits of Cambodia. And this was why, while the war was going on in neighbouring Vietnam with the Americans. Now, you know, it was the kind of the battles were kind of interlocked in a way because, you know, like America bombed large bits of Cambodia that were near to the border, you know, ostensibly because they said the Viet Cong were using bits of Cambodia to sort of like hide their troops and to smuggle goods to and from, you know. So it was all kind of like, so the Khmer Rouge were this like Chinese-backed communist group, and they gradually closed in on the country, and just sort of like at about the same time that the Viet Cong were in position to take over Saigon and the Americans pulled out of Saigon, the Khmer Rouge took over Phnom Penh. Now, when they took over Phnom Penh, you know, at first the kind of people cheered and pretended they were happy, but like the first thing the Khmer Rouge did was they ordered the whole population of the city out into the countryside. They told them that the Americans were going to come and bomb Phnom Penh. So they just said, look, you haven't got any time, just get out in the city. So they marched them all out into the city, and then they set them up in kind of like they wanted to set up this kind of rural community, kind of like what they called back to year zero society, you know, that was just simple and based upon production, farming, and that kind of thing. And part of their process was they wanted to eradicate all trace of what had gone on before, you know. So they ended up like hunting people who were educated people like doctors, school teachers, you know, politicians, their old enemies, you know, people who were in the Khmer army, and they ended up setting places like, you know, setting up interrogation camps where they just kind of interrogate people, and they would just basically they'd execute them, and they ended up in the 4 years that they were in control. You know, they were officially the government of the Khmer Rouge. They wiped out, I think, between 21 and 25% of the country's population.
Jesus.
Yeah,
And
yes.
and the infamous killing tree, I mean, where they literally, oh, I kind of don't want to say it on YouTube, but they murdered babies.
Yeah, that was in the killing fields. Yeah, that's a really, yeah, the killing fields is a really horrific place. I mean, it's, you know, it's a place you've got to go to. You know, you really have. You can't go to Phnom Penh and not go to places like Tuol Sleng, S21, and the killing fields. And it's, you know, it's just a very, very real place. I
Was
think,
that
you
the
know,
area where they executed, like brought them to a specific place?
that's right. There was one of many. I believe there were about 300 of these areas all over Cambodia, and I've been to one or two others, but that one is like the most famous. You know, that one place called Chuang Ai. You know, it's about 10, 15 kilometers out the centre of out of Phnom Penh. But yeah, it was just, you know, when they processed them, you had Tuol Sleng, which was like S21, which was a school, an old school that they'd sequestered, and they turned it into a prison become interrogation camp, and they'd just basically they'd round people up, just because they suspected them of whatever, being educated or being a threat, or and then they'd interrogate them over a period of weeks or months, torture them, and then they'd meticulously extract confessions.
In one of your videos, you mentioned a guy called Sean Flynn, and
Yeah.
I thought that was you covered it kind of briefly, but I thought like, wow, that seems like an interesting story, and he seems like an interesting guy. What's the background of Sean Flynn?
Right. Well, Sean Flynn was the son of the famous Australian actor Errol Flynn, the old swashbuckler. So he was his son, and he was briefly a movie star himself. I think he did 6 or 7 Hollywood, kind of B movies himself, but he'd inherited his father's sense of adventure. And when the Vietnam War was going on, he wanted to become a photojournalist, which he did. I think initially he was with Parry Match, and then I think he was with Time Life. But he ended up going to Vietnam. And when he was in Vietnam, he kind of teamed up. There was a big group of photojournalists who used to live in Saigon, and they were based in Saigon, and they were sort of, people like Tim Page, Sean Flynn. There was another one called Dana Stone, and there's, I don't know, 5 or 6 of them that are sort of like quite big names now, and the legends in the sort of photojournalism industry, and they were very kind of daring. They put themselves on the front line. They'd go on those helicopter missions and things like that. They do anything to get a picture. They got some fantastic pictures, and they were, some of them got injured, and they really sort of. I know Tim Page got injured and nearly killed. They were just really bold. Now, what happened was in 1970, it was just Cambodia, which bordered Vietnam, was developing as a story in its own right. There was like the American bombing of Cambodia was going on at that time, and also the Khmer Rouge were just kind of in their formative years, and also there was a Viet Cong presence near the border. So they'd heard about all this going on. So Sean Flynn and definitely at least 2, Sean Flynn and Dana Stone, and there were some others, relocated to Phnom Penh. And at the beginning of April 1970, there was a meeting quite near the border on Route 1 in Cambodia, quite near the border with Vietnam. And these photojournalists were invited to attend the meeting. And they laid on limousines, they laid on cars to transport the photojournalists. But Sean Flynn and Dana Stone had motorcycles. So they rode the motorcycles down there. And I mean, even if you do it on a bus these days, I think it takes like 2-3 hours, So I don't know, in those days, it must have been a good few hours on a motorcycle. And they turned up this place, they attended this meeting. But after it, the other journalists were kind of like just about to get into the cars and go back to Phnom Penh. But Sean Flynn and Dana Stone heard reports that, I believe it was the Viet Cong, had been spotted near the border, which was only like a few kilometres away. So they decided that they wanted to go back there and investigate. And I believe they heard stories that the day before, a big white car had been on that stretch of road, and it had been kidnapped by, either the Viet Cong or the Khmer Rouge. And they'd been kidnapped. I think it was a couple of Japanese photojournalists, I believe it was. So this car was apparently still in the middle of the road, and they wanted to go and investigate. Now, they were speaking, there's pictures of them taken by some of these photojournalists just before they set off on this final journey, like literally minutes before they were about to disappear. And they some of them said they overheard him, sort of, because they were very daring. I think some of them said they overheard him saying, I think Sean Flynn might have been saying, well, look, you know, like if they take us hostage, it will make a good story. You know, they were kind of looking at it at that level. You know, we were taken hostage by the Viet Cong or the Khmer Rouge. You know, they were kind of like, you know, obviously they just had that cavalier kind of brave attitude towards it, you know. Looking back now, foolish, you know. And so anyway, they rode up on the final sort of stretch of road with all this road. And when they come to the roadblock, there was some French photojournalists there in the road just before this roadblock. And they were talking to these French journalists. And I think they were actually saying, these French journalists all know, you know, they could see some soldiers on this, you know, it's a quiet area of road because I've actually explored. I actually, you know, like went and explored it once, you know, about 5-6 years ago. And it was this very quiet stretch of road. And there's actually video footage of them talking to these French photojournalists. And they were saying to them, oh, no, it's quite sort of dangerous, but we're just going to ride down the road to that roadblock and see what's happening. And they rode down there and they were taken prisoner and never seen by Westerners again. You know, there were reports, some villagers say that they were seen being kind of arrested and marched away. And then there's kind of like nothing but hearsay, but, you know, like most people believe that they were kept prisoner for a year or two and then executed. So Sean Flynn's mother spent a lot of money searching for him because, you know, she'd lost her husband, Errol Flynn, before that. And Sean Flynn was her only son, you know, was their only child. So she really felt that was a whole kind of family, you know, had been a whole kind of dynasty had ended, you know, so she never stopped looking for him. And I think it was 1984 she finally declared him dead in absentia. But yeah, just a really kind of like tragic story, you know. Very, very interesting character.
And that's the rumor that they were held for like a year or two and then executed, or is that what people have said? Like reports have come
Well,
back.
yeah, I believe that the strongest sort of belief is that they were actually taken by the Viet Cong, who handed them over to the Khmer Rouge. You know, and there are sort of stories that, you know, I forget the name. There is a city where some people believe there's stories that they might have been executed. And Tim Page and there were some others, I think some Australian guys did actually try to go looking to see if they could find their remains. And they did find the remains of two Westerners, which by coincidence was a tall Westerner and a smaller Westerner, which kind of fit the description of Sean Flynn and Dana Stone. But it turned out to be another couple of Westerners who'd kind of been captured by the Khmer Rouge around about the same time. And it wasn't then. So it's still, you know, it's still officially a mystery what happened to them.
What about the story of you running away from a woman that kind of followed you into a bar?
Yeah. That was oh yeah, that was about 10, 11 years ago. Yeah, I was out there with a couple of friends of mine, a couple of other English guys called Mick and Dave. And we went to this place called Golden Soria Mall, which was like, it was a real, you know, it was a real sort of like cheap meeting place. It was a place where people congregated. And there were kind of, it was just like this swathe of little bars come restaurants, you know, they were sort of like nice, cheap places. You could have like a basic meal and you could order some cheap beers. So people would sit there from the early afternoon and it would go on until late at night, you know, and we were sitting at the Golden Soria Mall, you know, myself, Mick and Dave, one evening, and we were just sitting down and they used to have sort of, you know, some ladies would hang around there, you know, it was, I just remember this sort of, this really kind of like big lady, you know, sort of like definitely not my type, sort of come down and smiled at me. She sort of smiled at me, and I just sort of might have looked back and sort of, I wouldn't say encouraged her, but I didn't scowl at her, you know. I think I might have returned a smile, and she she came over and just sort of, she sort of sat next to me. So I laughed, and Mick and Dave sort of gave me a look and sort of smiled. And then, so I just sort of sat, we carried on drinking a beer. And then she sort of like, she put her hand on she reached her hand over and sort of put her hand on my hand. And then she sort of like, you know, like, I didn't want to sort of like pull it away. I didn't want to sort of be nasty. So I just sort of like laughed. I just sort of humoured a bit, sort of played along. She sort of like stroked my arm, sort of like playing with the hairs on my arm. And she sort of started smiling and that. So I remember thinking, well, you know, if I just carry on talking with Mick and Dave and I don't buy her a drink, I don't encourage her, she'll eventually get bored. She'll realise that, you know, I'm not really interested and she'll just disappear. But she wasn't going to take no for an answer, you know. So and he reached the stage after about 30 minutes or so, you know, we'd had a couple of beers and I was just sort of like, I've kind of had enough of it. So I turned round to Mick and Dave. I said, look, you know, like, I don't think she's going to take the hint. Look, why don't we get a tuk-tuk down to 136, you know? There was a bar we used to hang at, Sweet Lemon Bar, still there, you know? We said, why don't we go down to Sweet Lemon Bar on 136, you know? We can carry on drinking there. And they sort of laughed. They said, you've got a right one there, Karl. And I said, yeah. I said, come on, look, we'll do it. You know, like, we'll get rid of her. So we jumped on one of them sort of large tuk-tuks they have out there. And she sort of like, as we were just about to pull away, she sort of literally just like jumped on the tuk-tuk sitting opposite us, you know? And she was sort of like a big lump. And she said something to the tuk-tuk driver. And the tuk-tuk driver just carried on going towards 136, you know, and I'm just sort of like, oh my God, you know, like, what is going on here? And it's sort of like, it's racing through my mind. I'm sort of thinking,
that's harassment, Karl.
Well, do you know what? It's kind of funny, Pete, but I kind of like, almost sort of like, I remember thinking, God, this is what it feels like. Maybe if you're a woman and you got you're trying to shake some bloke off, you know what I mean? You know, it was like, I think it was like, you know, I was thinking that, and I was thinking, well, how am I going to deal with this? And then I remember thinking, well, look, when we get to the bar, you know, they only want sort of paying customers in the bar. So I thought, what, the situation would take care of itself. You know what I mean? She wouldn't be welcome in the bar, you know. So it was an indoor bar. So we turned up at 136, and we got out, and she just sort of like jumped off with us. So I think I might have turned and said to her, look, stay there, you know. And then we walked into Sweet Lemon. She might have stayed there for 20 seconds or something. And we walked in there and ordered a beer. And then next thing I know, she's walked in, and I'm just sort of like, oh my God, you know, like, there she is. And she just sort of come up and stood right next to me and started smiling at me again. And she might have tried to grab my hand or something. Oh my God, what can I do? And so I'm thinking that I'm still thinking we can sort of like outdrink it, you know. I'm thinking, you know, like, if we just stand there drinking, they'll sort of look and they'll see she's not ordering a drink, and they'll just want to get rid of her or something. So we're sitting there drinking, and she's not going anywhere. So she didn't speak very good English or anything, so it was a bit hard to communicate with her. So I'm talking with Mick and Dave, and I'm sort of hatching a plan. And on 136, you know, they used to, and they still do, they've always got like loads of tuk-tuk drivers waiting outside, you know, for the tourists when they want to go home. So I've had an idea, and I've said to Mick and Dave, I said, look, what I'll do is I'll go out, I'll get one of the tuk-tuk drivers, and I'll offer him a nice bit of cash, and I'll tell him to go in there and sort of bring her out and take her home, you know? So I went out and I found this big sort of stocky tuk-tuk driver, and I just sort of said, listen, look, there's a lady in there, there's a big lady in there, and what I want you to do is, I don't want she's following me around. What I want you to do is I want you to go in there and take her out, and then just take her home. And I said, look, it was $7 or $8, and it was sort of, you know, going back, it was a nice bit of money for him, you know, because like the standard fare then was about $1, you know, so it was a nice bit of money for him. So I walked back in, and I thought, oh, that's it, you know, we've got that sorted. And so he came in, and started talking to this lady, and he's sort of conversing with her. And then I see this tuk-tuk driver give the money I'd given her, I'd given him to take her home. He gave it to her, and then she ordered a drink. so now she's a paying customer, you know. So I'm just like, oh my God, you know, like it just, where will it end? You know, like, so I had to come up with another plan. And eventually, like I said to Mick and Dave, I said, look, I said, what I'm going to have to do is, I said, I'll wait until she's distracted and looking the other way. And I was just, I'm just going to make a run for it. I'm going to run out the bar. I'm going to run up the road, and I'll settle myself down in another bar. And then when the coast is clear, send me a text message and we'll meet up somewhere later. So that's exactly what I did. You know, I just waited until a moment where she was looking the other way, and I just ran for the door, and I ran out on the 136, and I ran about 100 meters up the road. I knew she wouldn't be able to keep up with me. And then I just disappeared down the side road somewhere and sort of planted myself in another bar. And eventually, you know, like I got a message from them saying, all right, like, the coast is clear. So we met up somewhere, and I thought that was that. And then the next day we went back to Sweet Lemon Bar, and like, they were all like, nobody was talking to me, you know, nobody in the bar was talking. They were all sort of like looking at me and sort of scowling at me and looking down at me. And in the end, I knew a couple of them, and I said, look, what is the problem? And one of them said, you were a bad man. You tried to run out. You tried to run out of the bar without paying, you know. Because I suppose, yeah, I mean, thinking about it, you know, it's probably what it looked like. I was trying to run out without paying for my bill. But of course, you know, like, you know, Mick and Dave just paid my part of the bill, and I paid them later, you know. But I guess they might not have known that.
They just saw you running.
They just saw me running. Yeah, I guess they weren't fully aware what was going on. And so I sort of explained to one of them, and then a couple of them were still sort of like giving me the stink eye. And then one of them said, come up to me again. He said, oh, you're a bad man. Oh, yeah. Oh, just why? Why am I a bad man? And they said, why did you do that to your wife? So like they'd invented in this scenario that this woman was my wife.
And you're running away from your wife?
I'd like run out of the bar to get rid of my wife, you know. They just come up with this scenario in their heads, you know. But this happened, you know, and I really can't remember whether it was the same trip, Pete, or it was a few days later, or if it was our next trip out there a few months later. But it happened again with the same lady. I would just remember it was me, Mick and Dave, and we come out some shopping complex somewhere, and she was there, and she just looked and saw me, and she started following me, and I'm sort of like, oh my God, like, where can we go? And there used to be this bar quite near called Walkabout. So we walked into Walkabout, you know, it's like history repeating itself. We walk into Walkabout, and I've just sort of like, I've sat down, and she was about 100 meters behind us, you know, so we had a bit of ground on that. And I sat down, and I'd ordered a drink, and I just sort of seen a lady, and I'd sort of like called her over and said, oh, do you want a drink, you know? So I sort of like, I was just hoping that she'd sort of like see I was sitting with the lady and leave us alone, you know? So all this lady a drink, and I was sitting like quite close to this lady. I might put my hand on hers, whatever. And then eventually this lady followed me in again, and she's sort of like, oh, here we go again. This is it. And she come and sat next to me on the other side of the girl I was sitting with. And I'm thinking, God, what can we do? Like, maybe we're going to get security. You know, there's security. They get security to kick them out. And we sat there, and after a couple of minutes, this woman, this girl, I had my hand on her. This girl slapped this woman's hands who I was sitting with. She slapped her hand. So that was the excuse we needed to get security to deal with it, you know, because she'd sort of like assaulted one of the staff, you know. So we just sort of like, look, you know, no, look, that's it. You're going to have to get this. You're going to have to take this lady out. So they did. They carted her off.
She must have been in love with you, Karl.
Oh yeah, I don't know. Yeah, it was strange. It was strange, mate. It was strange. Yeah.
Well, let's talk about your channel for a second, Karl, because you've got a fantastic channel, and I will leave a link down below for it. You've I mean, tell us about your channel. You climb mountains. You do it's all this adventurous stuff. I mean, last video I watched, you went hiking up. You know, there's so many mountains you've hiked up. Tell us about your channel.
Yeah, yeah. Well, like, you know, like I've been visiting Thailand. I've spent time in Thailand every year since 1987. So it's all about 38 years now. And I'd always been sort of quite adventurous and enjoy the traveling. And I sort of like, you know, like I did all the main spots and the islands. I did them many, many years ago. And I still kind of love it. I mean, I live in Pattaya. I still love Pattaya, but I just kind of like, I'd always, to me, I really get my kicks from just discovering new places in Thailand. And there's just some amazing places that just like nobody ever goes to. And these places just blow your mind. You know, you go there and you just can't think, how the hell does nobody come here? You know, you just have these incredible experiences. So like my channel, Karl's Thailand, is about me kind of showing you those places, you know, and I just kind of like, in a way, it's got a bit of a rebellious streak to it because I'm kind of like almost, you know, as a YouTuber, you kind of feel that there's certain videos you've got to do and you've always got to chase the ones that are going to get the views. You know, there's certain times, like I remember Paddy Doyle saying, well, you know, and he's quite right. If you want to be successful, there's certain videos you've got to do, like you've got to go to Mark Wian's restaurant in Bangkok and do that because, you know, like he's got, you know, I don't know, 10 million subscribers, whatever he's got, and then the algorithm will pick you up and whatever. And I just sort of, you know, I can't get into that way of thinking. You know, nothing against Mark Wian's restaurant, you know, but my point was I wasn't going to make a vlog out of it. Do you know what I mean? I'm not going to like chase the algorithm and do these sort of like these videos that just sort of like everyone's going to do just because they're popular subjects, you know. So yeah, so what I prefer to do is I just prefer to show people these really remote things, you know, kind of like, you know, what do you do if you've been coming to Thailand for years and years and years and you got a sense of adventure? You know, what do you do? Where do you go? Like what really sparks you? And with me, that's it. You know, like I would just sort of like, I've always been that, you know, if someone says to me, look, Karl, this weekend, like I've heard about this amazing jungle trail, you know, like we could do it. We could go, like, we got to hike miles into the jungle and then we'll camp the night and do it. If we just sort of like, yeah, let's do it. Or, you know, like I've done a few, you know, with some of my friends, you know, people like Baldy Brian or Jimmy JB Wonders, you know, where we're here like, oh, somebody got attacked by 3 tigers, you know, we did that, you know, like what an incredible story. So we went and we traced the guy down, you know, just in the arse end of nowhere. And all we had was what we saw on these newspaper articles. And we just went there in the arse end of nowhere. And we were just sort of like, because I can speak Thai, you know, we just talked to the locals and we just pinned this guy down, you know, and it was just this epic adventure where we had to get hire boats across this national park. And eventually we pinned this guy, managed to pin him down, find him. And he was like happy to see us. And he told his story, you know, it just, yeah, that's what Karl's Thailand is about. It's kind of like just me indulging my sort of sense of adventure and trying to share it with you.
Well, I mean, it is you're passionate, and it comes across in your videos as well that you're passionate about what you do. I mean, I think your videos are because like I do like climbing and hiking and stuff like that, but to build a channel and make videos around it, it's hard. But you can hold people's attention very well in how you present.
Yeah, cheers. Thanks a lot, Pete. You know, I do occasionally, you know, like I do reserve the freedom to do other type of stuff, and I do from time to time. Like, you know, my most popular videos are the ones where I dig out my old photographs and tell stories, you know, like from the 80s and that. Because I did, you know, in Thailand from sort of 87 to 92, I took a lot of pictures, and those videos are really popular. But there's just only a certain number of those that you can do. But yeah, that's Karl's Thailand. You know, like I'm not chasing the algorithm, you know, like I'm not gonna. I remember coming out with a video, you know, that I thought was really good a few months back, and then seeing this guy on the same day I put a video out, and it was called I run a bar in Pattaya, and I will tell you how Thai girls lie to you. I just sort of like, I put my hands in, and I just knew that that guy was going to get all the views. Do you know what I mean? You know, like, but I just thought, no, no, I don't want to go there.
Well, what about what you're doing now, Karl? Because you can see there you're sitting in a very posh kind of a building there. I think there's even a fireplace behind you there, but I doubt that's a real
It's,
fireplace.
yeah, yeah, it's nice. Yeah, I work for a legal company now in Pattaya, you know, like Anglo Siam Legal. And they've been running for a few years, but they only recently set up their office here in Pattaya. And I've had sort of like quite a varied year this year. I spent a few months working in Laos. You know, even got to the stage where I got a work permit for Laos, but you know, like that was a story. So that only ended up lasting for a few months, and so I found myself in between jobs, and the timing was perfect. So yeah, I was invited to come and join the team, and they got me a work permit, and that's it. Anglo Siam Legal.
Now, and what do you do there, Karl? You're not a lawyer, are you?
I do a lot of their video promotions, but
Ah,
I'm also learning a lot of like the customer liaison and things like that. And then when I know enough. You know, I can be kind of like the front end guy where I know, if somebody comes in with something they want us to help them with, I'll know what questions to ask, and I can just sort of like take all the details and then either arrange an appointment for them to see somebody, or I can even sort of like tell them what they need and ask get all their documentation, whatever, and come back. So yeah. At the moment, it's mainly kind of video, behind the scenes video promotions, but it's becoming more and more frontline.
nice, nice. And
Yeah, it's
imagine like,
interesting.
yeah, it is interesting, and I'd imagine it's like it's good for your health because you're not in a bar, people buying you drinks and you're forced to drink, and you're just like, that's
Yeah,
not
I've
that's
been there.
not conductive to a long lasting life, really.
Not yeah. I mean, I've played that game before. A lot of guys know. A few years ago, I was helping to manage bars. Which is fine, and it suited me at the time. But yeah, at my age, there's only so long you can get away with that game. It just it's going to catch up with you very quick. As much fun as it is, and you meet some great people, but
Oh yeah,
yeah, I
great
can't
fun.
do that again. Yeah, I can't go back there.
Well, look, Karl, it's been a pleasure, man. I'll leave the link for your channel, Karl's Thailand, down below. And look, all the best. I'm going to be following your channel. We'll definitely have you on again. You're going to have more stories in the future. So, yeah,
You
man.
have to next time you're out here, Pete. We have to do something adventurous, mate. We have to go somewhere interesting.
But I am kind of thinking of planning a trip, and I will be planning a trip this year. So I will be there this year. And yeah, man,
We'll
I
do it, mate.
definitely.
3 days off the side. Invite a friend or two.
All right, Karl. Look, man. Thanks very much for coming on, and definitely we'll do it again.
Yeah, yeah, pleasure. Anytime, Pete.
Cheers,
Thank you.
Karl. Enjoy the rest of your day. Yeah.
I will do.
Cheers, mate.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.